My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore, and I stood in the community center, my hands clasped so tightly, my knuckles ached as if that grip could hold me together. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee floral perfume and the faint tang of polished wood. Around me, the hum of voices wove a tapestry of small-town life neighbors, catching up families laughing the mayor's wife holding court near the front. I was just another face in the folding chair, rose unnoticed, unremarkable. My sister Clara sat 4 rows ahead, her laughter cutting through the noise like a blade. She didn't turn to look for me. She never did. I wore my gray cardigan, its left cuff frayed from years of nervous tugging. My hair was pulled back in a low bun, neat but plain the way I'd worn it for decades. To the people in this room, I was Eleanor the spinster, the quiet woman who lived in the little house on Maple Street, the one who never married, never left, never shone. Poor Eleanor, they'd say, their voices dripping with pity if they bothered to speak of me at all. She's got nothing to show for her life. I'd heard it at the grocery store, at church, in the diner where I ate alone on Sundays. I'd learned to let it slide off me like rain on glass, but it still left a mark. That night, the town hall was packed for the annual Hero Awards. They were honoring the usual suspects: firefighters who'd braved a blaze, a teacher who'd gone viral for her kindness, a teenage quarterback who'd pulled a child from the river last summer. The mayor stood at the podium, his tie askew, his voice a monotone drone, as he read from a crumpled note card. I sat near the back, my purse heavy on my lap, its contents a secret I carried like a bruise. Tucked inside beneath a pack of tissues, a tube of hand cream, and a few stray receipts was a letter. Its edges were worn soft, the paper thin from years of handling. I hadn't opened it in a decade, but I didn't need to. Its words were carved into me as permanent as the lines on my palms. For distinguished service, unparalleled contribution, national security. Words that didn't belong to the woman they saw sitting here clapping politely, blending into the shadows. Clara was called to the stage, her charity work earning her a polished wooden plaque. She glided up her dress, catching the light, her smile wide enough to charm the room. The applause was warm, enthusiastic, and I joined in, my hands moving slowly, deliberately. She glanced my way as she returned to her seat. Just for a moment, but her eyes slid over me like I was part of the scenery. That look, it was a knife, small but sharp, slicing into the place where I kept my oldest hurts. Our mother used to say, Clara was the sun, radiant, impossible to ignore. I was the moon, she'd say, steady, quiet, only noticed when the world went dark. She meant it as a compliment. It never felt like one. I was used to it, though. The way people's gazes skipped over me. The way the cashier at the market called me ma'am with a tone that said I was already half forgotten. The whispers at church about how I'd squandered my years, how I'd let life pass me by. They didn't know. They couldn't. And I'd made my peace with that, or at least I'd tried. I told myself it didn't matter what they thought, that I'd chosen this life, this silence. But some nights like tonight, the weight of their judgment pressed harder, and I felt every inch of it. The mayor was wrapping up, thanking the sponsors, his voice fading into the background as I traced the seam of my purse with my thumbnail. I wanted to be home in my small living room with my tea and my silence. But then the double doors at the back of the room swung open and the air changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the crowd's rhythm, a hitch in their chatter. I didn't look up. I was focused on the frayed thread at my cuff, on the way it caught the light. But the room grew quieter, the murmurs fading into a hush. Even Clara, mid-conversation with the mayor's wife, stopped her head, turning toward the entrance. Eleanor Whitmore. The voice was low, commanding, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. My heart lurched, a single painful thud. I kept my eyes down, my breath caught in my throat. Nobody said my name like that. Nobody knew my name like that. The silence in the room was heavy now, pressing against me, and I felt their eyes, dozens, maybe hundreds, pinning me in place. I lifted my head, slow, deliberate, and found him. He stood just inside the doorway, a man in a suit so sharp it seemed to cut the air around him. His hair was silver at the temples, his face etched with lines that spoke of authority, not age. And he was looking at me. I don't remember standing. I don't remember the scrape of my chair against the linoleum or the way my purse slid to the floor, its contents spilling unnoticed. But I was on my feet, my hands trembling, my cardigan suddenly too warm, too heavy. The crowd was a blur, their faces indistinct, but I felt their confusion, their curiosity like a current running through the room. Clara's plaque was forgotten in her hands, her mouth slightly open, her eyes darting between me and the man. The mayor cleared his throat, his note card fluttering to the podium, but the man didn't glance his way. He crossed the room, his steps measured, deliberate, and stopped in front of me. The crowd parted for him, their whispers a low hum like bees trapped in a jar. "Ma'am," he said, his voice softer now, almost reverent, but still carrying that weight. "We've been looking for you." I wanted to laugh to tell him he was mistaken. I was Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who darned her own socks, who fed the stray cats behind her house, who sat alone in the diner with a book she'd read a dozen times. But his eyes held mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Recognition, respect, maybe even gratitude. It was a look I'd buried long ago, locked away with the letter in my purse, with the life I'd left behind. My fingers brushed the strap of my bag, and I felt the letter's presence, its words whispering in my mind. "For your service, for your sacrifice." He extended his hand not for a handshake, but to guide me forward, his gesture both invitation and command. "Please," he said, "come with me." I didn't move, not at first. My feet were rooted, my pulse loud in my ears. The room was watching, waiting, their confusion a palpable thing. Clara's face was pale, her eyes wide with something I couldn't name, shock, maybe, or disbelief. I wanted to shrink, to vanish, to be the moon again, unseen until the world needed me. But his hand was steady, and when he spoke again, his voice was a quiet insistence. "Eleanor, it's time." I took a step, then another, my cardigan brushing my wrists, my shoes whispering against the floor. The crowd parted wider, their faces a haze of surprise and doubt. I didn't look at Clara. I didn't look at anyone. I followed him, my heart a drumbeat, my breath shallow. The doors loomed ahead, and with every step I felt the weight of their stares, their questions, their disbelief. Who was I to be singled out like this? Who was I to be seen? We reached the doors, and he held one open for me. I paused just for a moment and glanced back. Clara was still standing, her plaque clutched tight, her expression unreadable. I wanted to say something to explain, but the words stayed locked inside me where they'd always lived. I stepped through the door, and it closed behind me with a soft thud. The silence that followed was absolute. If you're still here, if you're wondering who I am, who I was, then stay with me. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's walk this path together. This story, it's only the beginning. The hallway outside the community center was dim, the fluorescent lights flickering like they were tired. My shoes echoed on the linoleum, each step, a small betrayal of the silence I'd spent years perfecting. The man in the suit walked beside me, his presence steady, unhurried. He hadn't said a word since we left the room, and I was grateful for it. My heart was still racing, my thoughts a tangle of memory and fear. Who was he? Why, now I kept my eyes forward. My hands clasped the frayed cuff of my cardigan, brushing my wrist. The letter in my purse felt heavier than ever, its words clawing at the edges of my mind. We stopped at a side door, the kind that leads to parking lots and forgotten corners. He opened it, and the night air hit me cool and sharp, smelling of asphalt and distant rain. A black SUV waited, its engine idling, its windows dark. I hesitated, my breath catching. I'd been here before, not this exact place, but this moment, this choice. A door, a vehicle, a life I'd sworn I'd left behind. He must have sensed my pause because he turned, his eyes softening just enough to notice. "You're safe, Eleanor," he said. "I promise you that. Safe." The word felt foreign, like a language I'd forgotten. I nodded, though, and slid into the back seat. The door closed with a soft click, and the SUV pulled away, the community center shrinking in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The drive was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against you, demanding you fill it. I didn't. Neither did he. My mind drifted unmoored, and I let it. I was 22 again, standing in a desert under a sky so wide it swallowed me. The air was dry, the heat a living thing, and I was sweating through my fatigues, my hands steady on the console I'd been trained to operate. The equipment was classified its purpose even more so. I didn't ask questions back then. I just worked my fingers moving faster than my thoughts, decoding, rerouting, building something nobody else could. They called me Sparrow in those days, a code name that felt like a secret I hadn't earned. I was young, focused, invisible in the way that suited me. The team respected me, but they didn't know me. Nobody did. I blinked and the desert was gone. The SUV hummed along a highway, the lights of my small town fading into the distance. I shifted my purse, digging into my thigh, and caught the man watching me in the rearview mirror. He was in the front now, beside the driver, his posture relaxed but alert. I wanted to ask who he was, what he wanted, but the words stuck. Instead, I thought of the nights I'd spent alone in that desert compound, the hum of servers my only company. I'd sit in the dark, my head set, on listening to transmissions that could change the world. I never told anyone about the weight of it, the way it settled in my bones. I didn't have anyone to tell. There was a man once, though. His name was Daniel, and he was an analyst, sharp-eyed, quick with a smile. We'd sit on the roof sometimes, sharing coffee from a thermos, watching the stars. He'd talk about his family, his dreams of a house by the ocean. I'd listen my own stories locked tight. He asked me once what I was afraid of. I said nothing. It was a lie. I was afraid of being known, of letting someone see the parts of me that lived in the shadows. He kissed me that night, soft, hesitant, and I let him. But when the mission ended, I walked away. I didn't say goodbye. It was easier that way. The SUV slowed, pulling into a lot outside a nondescript building, all concrete and glass. I recognized it vaguely, a federal office, the kind nobody notices. The man opened my door, and I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my shoes. My cardigan felt thin against the night, and I crossed my arms more out of habit than cold. He gestured toward the entrance, and I followed, my pulse steady, now resigned. Whatever this was, I'd face it. I always had. Inside, the lobby was sterile, the kind of place that smells of disinfectant and bureaucracy. A woman at the desk glanced up, then stood, her eyes widening. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, her voice clipped professional. "This way, please." I froze. Ms. Whitmore, not Eleanor, not ma'am. My name spoken like it meant something. The man nodded at her, and she led us down a corridor, her heels clicking. I wanted to ask how she knew me, but my mouth was dry, my thoughts scattered. We stopped at a conference room, its door heavy, reinforced. She opened it, and I stepped inside. The room was sparse, a long table, a few chairs, a projector humming faintly. But on the far wall, a screen displayed a photograph. It was grainy, black and white, but I knew it instantly. Me younger, my hair shorter, my eyes sharp behind protective glasses. I was bent over a console, my hands on a keyboard, the room around me a blur of cables and screens. My breath caught, and I turned away, my heart loud in my ears. "Sit, please," the man said, his voice gentle now. I did, my hands folding in my lap, my purse at my feet. He took the chair across from me, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his expression unreadable. "My name is Colonel James Hargrove," he said, "and I owe you an apology. We should have found you sooner." I stared at him, my mind racing. Found me, I'd hidden myself, buried my past, so deep even I could pretend it wasn't real. I'd left that life, left Sparrow, left the desert, and the consoles and the weight of secrets nobody should carry. I'd come back to this town, to Clara, to the house our mother left us, and I'd made myself small. I'd wanted to be small, but his eyes told me he knew. He knew everything. "You don't understand." I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not that person anymore." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "You built the grid, Eleanor, the intelligence network that's kept this country safe for decades. You think you can walk away from that?" I flinched, the words hitting like a slap. The grid. My grid. I'd been 25 when I started a prodigy they'd plucked from a university lab and thrown into the deep end. I didn't sleep for months, my world a haze of code and signals and impossible deadlines. I'd built something nobody else could, a system that connected dots nobody else saw. It was my mind, my hands, my sleepless nights, and when it was done, they'd called me a hero. Then they'd sent me away because heroes like me didn't belong in the light. I didn't want it, I said, my voice cracking. I never asked for it. Hargrove's eyes softened, but he didn't look away. Nobody asks for it. But you did it. And now we need you again. I laughed a small, bitter sound. Need me? I was 52, my hands stiff from years of mending curtains and washing dishes. I was the woman who clipped coupons, who smiled at strangers, who sat alone in her mother's house. I wasn't Sparrow, not anymore. But the photograph on the screen stared back at me, and I saw her young, fierce, unafraid. I saw the woman I'd buried. He slid a folder across the table, its edges crisp official. Read it, he said. Then decide. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I knew what it would say. Missions, codes, sacrifices. I knew what it would ask of me. I looked at him, at the photograph, at the life I'd tried to forget. And I felt it, that old pull, the one that had kept me awake in the desert, the one that had made me Sparrow. I hated it. I wanted it. I didn't know how to be anything else. The room was quiet, the projectors hummed, the only sound. I thought of Clara, of the community center, of the life I'd built to keep myself safe. I thought of Daniel, his coffee, his smile. I thought of the letter in my purse, its words a chain I'd never broken. And I wondered for the first time in years who I was when nobody was watching. The SUV dropped me back at my house just before dawn, the sky a bruised gray that matched my thoughts. I stood on my porch, my key cold in my hand, and listened to the engine fade into the distance. The neighborhood was still the only sound, the faint rustle of leaves skittering across the lawn. My purse hung heavy on my shoulder, the folder Colonel Hargrove had given me tucked inside its weight, a quiet accusation. I hadn't opened it. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old wood, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting me like an old friend. I set my purse on the kitchen table, careful not to disturb the silence. The clock on the wall ticked, steady, relentless. I filled the kettle, my movements automatic, and stood by the stove as it hummed to life. The routine grounded me, kept me from spiraling. Tea, cup, spoon, sugar, simple things, safe things. But my eyes kept drifting to the purse, to the folder, to the life I'd tried to bury. I hadn't slept. Not really. The drive back had been a blur, my mind caught in a loop of memory and doubt. Hargrove's words echoed, "You built the grid, Eleanor. We need you. Need me." The idea was absurd. I was the woman who mowed her own lawn, who nodded politely at the mailman, who kept her head down. But the photograph in that conference room, the one of me at 25, bent over a console with eyes that burned, they'd seen me. The real me. And now I couldn't unsee her. I carried my tea to the living room and sank into the armchair, the one my mother used to sit in. The cushions sagged, worn from years of use, and I traced the faded floral pattern with my finger. Clara's face flashed in my mind, her expression from the community center frozen in my memory. Shock, confusion, maybe a flicker of envy. She'd called me after, left a voicemail I hadn't answered. Eleanor, what was that? Who was that man? Call me. Her voice had been sharp, demanding, the way it always was when she didn't understand something. I hadn't called back. I didn't know what to say. The town was already talking. I'd felt it in the air when I stopped at the diner for coffee that morning, the way the waitress lingered a little too long, her eyes curious. Heard you had quite the night, Eleanor. She'd said, her smile polite but probing. I'd nodded, murmured something vague, and left a tip I couldn't afford. They didn't know anything, not really, but they'd spin their stories. They always did. Spinster Eleanor, suddenly interesting. Poor Eleanor hiding something. I could hear them now at the beauty parlor, the gas station, the church pews. She's always been odd, hasn't she? Living alone like that? No wonder. I sipped my tea, the warmth doing little to ease the knot in my chest. Odd. That's what they called me. The younger women were the worst, the ones who'd grown up with Clara's daughters, all confidence and sharp edges. They'd smile at me in the grocery store, their carts full of organic kale and sparkling water, their voices loud with purpose. "Oh, Eleanor, you're so sweet," they'd say when I let them cut in line or held the door. Sweet. Like I was a child, or worse, a relic. They didn't see me. They saw a gray cardigan, a quiet voice, a life they'd never choose. There was one Jessica who lived down the street. She was 30 maybe, with a laugh like Clara's and a way of talking that filled a room. She'd stopped by last summer collecting signatures for some neighborhood petition. I'd invited her in, offered her iced tea. She'd sat at my kitchen table, her nails tapping the glass, her eyes scanning the room like she was cataloging it. "You've got such a cozy place," she'd said, her tone just shy of condescending. "Must be nice having so much time to yourself." I'd smiled, said nothing. She didn't know about the nights I sat up, the memories that kept me awake. She didn't know about the letter, the grid, the desert. She saw what she wanted: a lonely woman, a nobody. I set my cup down, the porcelain clinking softly against the saucer. My hands were steady, but inside I was trembling. Not with anger, not exactly. It was something deeper, something I'd carried for years. The weight of being unseen, of being less. I'd let them think it, let them build their stories. It was easier that way, safer. But now, with Hargrove's folder sitting on my table, with Clara's voicemail unanswered, with the town whispering my name, I felt the cracks in that safety. I felt Sparrow stirring her shadow, stretching across the years. I stood restless and crossed to the window. The street was quiet, the houses dark. I thought of Jessica, of Clara, of the women at church who'd cluck their tongues and say, "Such a shame about Eleanor." I thought of the community center, the way the room had gone silent when Hargrove said my name. I thought of the desert, the consoles, the nights I'd spent building something bigger than myself. And I thought of Daniel, his voice soft under the stars, asking me what I was afraid of. I'd lied to him. I was afraid of this, of being seen, of being known, of letting the world in. The phone rang, shattering the quiet. I froze, my hand hovering over the receiver. Clara again, probably, or maybe Jessica fishing for gossip. I let it ring, each trill a small rebellion. When it stopped, the silence was heavier, expectant. I crossed to the table, my fingers brushing the purse. I pulled out the folder, its surface cool, official. I didn't open it. Instead, I carried it to the bookshelf, tucking it behind a row of novels I'd read a dozen times. Out of sight, but not gone. Never gone. The next day, I went to the library, my usual haunt. The librarian, Mrs. Carter, nodded as I walked in, her smile kind but distant. I settled at a table with a stack of history books, my cover for the hours I spent there, away from the house, away from Clara's calls. But today the words blurred. My mind was elsewhere, on Hargrove, on the folder, on the life I'd left. A group of women sat nearby, their voices low but sharp. Jessica was among them, her laugh unmistakable. I kept my head down, but I heard her say my name. "Eleanor Whitmore," she said, her tone half amused, half curious. Can you believe it? Some big shot in a suit calling her out like she's somebody. I mean, Eleanor, she's practically a ghost. The others murmured agreement, their words a soft sting. I turned a page, my hand steady, my face blank. But inside I was burning, not with anger, not yet, with memory, with the weight of who I'd been. I wanted to stand, to walk over, to tell them about the desert, the grid, the nights I'd spent saving lives they'd never know about. But I didn't. I sat silent, the moon in their bright world. When I left, Jessica was outside, her phone pressed to her ear. She saw me and waved her smile, bright, oblivious. "Eleanor, you okay? Heard you had a wild night." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes were sharp, searching. "I'm fine," I said, my voice soft, practiced, just a misunderstanding. She nodded, already turning back to her call, dismissing me. I walked home, the folder weighting the town, whispering my heart, heavy with the truth I couldn't speak. I was Eleanor Whitmore, the nobody. And I was Sparrow, the shadow who'd changed the world. I didn't know how to be both. Not yet. The invitation came in a cream envelope, the kind with embossed edges that feels too heavy for ordinary mail. It arrived on a Tuesday, slipped through the slot in my front door while I was at the diner picking at a slice of pie I didn't want. When I got home, it was waiting on the mat, my name written in careful calligraphy, Ms. Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I stood there staring at it, my purse still slung over my shoulder, the house quiet around me. I knew what it was before I opened it. The town had been buzzing about the gala for weeks, a black tie affair to honor the county's veterans and civic leaders. Clara had mentioned it in passing, her voice bright with the assumption I wouldn't go. "It's not really your thing, is it, Eleanor?" She'd said her smile kind but dismissive. I hadn't argued. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table, my fingers tracing its edges. The paper was smooth, expensive, the kind of thing that belonged in someone else's life. I set it down unopened and made tea instead. The ritual a shield against the unease curling in my chest. The folder from Colonel Hargrove was still hidden on my bookshelf, its presence a quiet hum in the back of my mind. I hadn't touched it since that night hadn't dared, but the envelope felt like an extension of it, another pull toward a past I'd tried to bury. I sipped my tea, the steam rising in soft curls, and told myself I wouldn't go. I didn't belong at galas with their chandeliers and champagne flutes. I belonged here in my small house with my frayed cardigan and my silence. But Clara called that evening, her voice sharp through the phone. "Eleanor, you got the invitation, didn't you? You have to come. Everyone's talking about you after that stunt at the town hall. You can't just hide." Her words were laced with something I couldn't name, curiosity maybe, or irritation. She didn't ask about the man in the suit, not directly, but I heard the question in her pause. I murmured something about being tired, and she sighed, the sound heavy with years of disappointment. "Fine," she said, "but I'm picking you up. 7 o'clock Saturday, wear something nice." She hung up before I could protest. I stood by the phone, my hand still on the receiver, the kitchen clock ticking behind me. Wear something nice. I didn't own anything nice, not the way Clara meant it. My closet held practical things, slacks, blouses, the gray cardigan that had become my armor. I thought of the gala, of the crowd, of the eyes that would follow me after Hargrove's appearance. I thought of Jessica, her laugh, her careless words at the library. I thought of the letter in my purse, the folder on my shelf, the photograph of a woman I didn't recognize anymore. And I felt it, that old pull, the one that had made me Sparrow. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was there, stirring. Saturday came too quickly. I spent the day restless, my hands busy with small tasks, dusting shelves, watering plants, anything to keep my mind from the evening ahead. I opened the invitation at noon, finally my hands steady but my heart uneven. The words were formal, printed in gold ink. "You are cordially invited to the annual Heroes Gala, in recognition of your contributions." My contributions. I laughed, a small, bitter sound. They didn't know. They couldn't. But the invitation was addressed to me, not Clara, not the mayor, not the quarterback. Me. I set it down, my fingers lingering on the paper, and wondered who had sent it. By 6, I was standing in front of my mirror, a dress I hadn't worn in years laid out on the bed. It was navy simple with a modest neckline and a hem that brushed my knees. I'd bought it for a funeral our mother's 7 years ago and hadn't touched it since. It still fit, though it hung looser than I remembered, my body quieter now, less sharp. I smoothed my hair, pinned it back, and added a pair of pearl earrings, the only jewelry I owned. I looked presentable. Not like Clara with her tailored gowns and bright lipstick, but enough. I hoped. Clara's car pulled up at 7 sharp, her horn, a quick, impatient beep. I grabbed my purse, the same one with the letter still inside, and stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin. She was in the driver's seat, her dress a deep red that caught the streetlight. Her hair swept up in a way that screamed effort. She looked at me as I slid in her eyes, scanning, assessing. "You look nice," she said, but her tone was flat, like she was surprised I'd tried. I nodded, my hands folded in my lap, and we drove in silence, the radio humming softly between us. The gala was at the county courthouse, a grand old building with marble steps and stained glass windows. Cars lined the lot, their headlights slicing through the dusk. Clara parked, and we walked up the steps, her heels clicking, my flats silent. The lobby was a sea of suits and gowns, the air thick with perfume and laughter. I felt the eyes immediately, the quick glances, the whispered questions. "That's Eleanor, isn't it, Clara's sister?" I kept my head up, my expression neutral, but my pulse was loud, unsteady. Clara moved ahead, greeting people, her smile wide. I followed, a shadow in her wake. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers cast soft light over round tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played in the corner, their notes delicate, almost lost in the hum of conversation. I found my name on a place card near the back, tucked between a retired principal and a councilman's wife. Clara was at a table closer to the stage, her laughter already drawing attention. I sat my purse in my lap and focused on the centerpiece, a small vase of roses, their petals too perfect to be real. The principal nodded at me, polite but distracted. The councilman's wife didn't look my way. I was invisible again, and for a moment I was grateful. But then Jessica walked in, her dress a shimmering green, her arm linked with a man I didn't recognize. She saw me and waved her smile, bright but sharp, like she was cataloging me for later. Eleanor. You made it. She called loud enough for heads to turn. I nodded, my lips curving just enough to pass for a smile. She didn't come over, but I felt her eyes, her curiosity, her need to understand why I was here. I looked away, my fingers tightening on my purse, the letter inside a quiet anchor. The evening dragged the speeches, predictable praise for the veterans, the teachers, the heroes everyone knew. I clapped when expected, my hands soft, mechanical. Clara was called to the stage again, her charity work earning another round of applause. She glowed, her voice warm as she thanked the crowd. I watched her, my heart a mix of pride and ache. She was the sun, always had been. I was the moon, and I'd made peace with that, or so I'd thought. Then the doors opened again and the room shifted. The quartet paused, their bows still. The chatter faded, replaced by a low murmur. I didn't look up, not at first. I was tracing the edge of my napkin, my mind half lost in the desert, in the hum of consoles and the life I'd left. But the air changed, heavy with anticipation, and I felt it, the same pull I'd felt at the town hall. I lifted my eyes, slow, deliberate, and saw him. Colonel Hargrove, his suit impeccable, his presence commanding. He wasn't alone. Two others followed, their uniforms crisp, their faces unreadable. The crowd parted, their whispers a soft wave. Hargrove scanned the room, his gaze deliberate, searching. I sank lower in my chair, my heart loud in my ears. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be seen. But his eyes found mine, and he moved his steps, sure, unhurried. The room watched, their confusion palpable. Clara's head turned, her smile faltering. Jessica's mouth opened, her date forgotten. The councilman's wife leaned forward, her fork paused midair. He stopped at my table, his shadow falling over me. Ms. Whitmore. He said, his voice low but clear, carrying across the silent room. We've been looking for you. I froze, my hands trembling, my purse heavy in my lap. The letter burned, its words alive in my mind. I wanted to run, to disappear, to be the moon again. But his eyes held mine, and I saw it, respect, gratitude, a truth I couldn't escape. I stood slow, unsteady, my dress brushing my knees. The room was a blur, their faces indistinct, but I felt their shock, their disbelief. Who was I to be called out like this? Who was I to be seen? The ballroom felt like it was holding its breath. The chandeliers above cast fractured light across the tables, and the roses in their vases seemed to lean toward the silence. Colonel Hargrove stood before me, his presence a wall between me and the room. His words, "We've been looking for you," hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. My hands trembled at my sides, the navy dress too thin, too exposed. My purse was still on the chair, the letter inside it a pulse I couldn't ignore. I wanted to sit, to shrink, to let the moment pass, but his eyes held mine steady, unyielding, and I knew there was no escaping this. Ms. Whitmore, he said again, his voice softer now, but still carrying that quiet command. Please come with me. It wasn't a question. The two men in uniform behind him stood at attention, their faces carved from stone, their metals glinting under the lights. The crowd was a sea of eyes, their whispers a low current. Clara's table, Jessica's wide stare, the councilman's wife clutching her napkin like a lifeline. I felt them all, their confusion, their disbelief, their need to understand. But I couldn't look away from Hargrove. Not now. I took a step, my flat silent on the polished floor. My heart was loud, a drumbeat in my chest, but my face was calm, practiced. I'd learned long ago to hide what I felt, to keep Sparrow buried where no one could find her. The room watched, their silence heavier than their whispers had been. Clara's chair scraped as she half stood, her red dress a blur in my peripheral vision. Jessica's hand was on her date's arm, her mouth slightly open as if she could will the moment to make sense. I didn't look at them. I followed Hargrove my steps, measured my hands clasped to keep them still. He led me toward the stage where the podium stood empty. The mayor hovering nearby, his tie still crooked, his expression a mix of awe and uncertainty. The quartet in the corner hadn't resumed playing. Their bows rested on their strings, their eyes on us. Hargrove stopped at the base of the steps, turning to face me. The two officers flanked him, their uniforms a stark contrast to the gowns and tuxedos around us. I felt small, out of place, a woman in a funeral dress standing where heroes belonged. But Hargrove's gaze told me I wasn't out of place. Not tonight. Eleanor, he said, and the use of my first name startled me, soft as it was. We owe you this moment. His voice carried, not loud but clear, reaching every corner of the room. I wanted to shake my head to tell him he was wrong, that I was just Eleanor, the nobody, the moon. But his eyes were steady, and I saw something there. Gratitude, yes, but also insistence, as if he wouldn't let me hide anymore. He gestured to the stage, and I hesitated, my breath shallow. The crowd was still, their faces a blur of anticipation and doubt. I thought of the desert, the consoles, the nights I'd spent alone with secrets too big for one person to carry. I thought of the letter, its words a chain I'd worn for decades. I thought of Clara, of Jessica, of the town that had decided who I was without asking. And I thought of Sparrow, her shadow stretching across the years, waiting. I climbed the steps, slow, deliberate, my hand brushing the railing for balance. The stage was brighter than I'd expected, the lights warm against my skin. Hargrove followed the officers behind him, their boots a soft echo. The mayor stepped back, his hands fidgeting, his role forgotten. I stood at the podium, my hands empty, my purse left behind. The room was a sea of faces now, their silence absolute. I didn't look at Clara. I didn't look at anyone. I looked at Hargrove, and he nodded just once, a gesture that felt like permission. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice filling the space. Tonight we honor those who have served, who have sacrificed, who have shaped our world in ways most will never know. He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd, then returning to me. Eleanor Grace Whitmore is one such person. My name landed like a stone in still water ripples spreading through the room. I heard a gasp, Clara's maybe or Jessica's, and felt the weight of their stares. I kept my eyes on Hargrove, my hands clasped tight, my face a mask. He continued his words, measured, deliberate. Many of you know her as a neighbor, a sister, a friend, but I know her as Sparrow, and so does the nation she served. Sparrow. The word was a blade, sharp and familiar, cutting through the years I'd spent burying it. The crowd stirred, their whispers rising, but Hargrove's voice cut through them. In the early 1990s, at an age when most are finding their path, Eleanor Whitmore was building ours. She designed and implemented an intelligence network that became the backbone of our national security, a grid that connected dots nobody else could see, a system that saved lives, prevented wars, and protected this country in ways I cannot fully disclose even now. The room was silent again, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. I felt their eyes, their shock, their disbelief. I wanted to look down to hide, but I didn't. I stood, my shoulders straight, my heart loud but steady. Hargrove turned to me, his expression softening. Eleanor, you were 25 when you gave us that grid. You worked in shadows without recognition, without complaint. You asked for nothing. And when your service ended, you chose silence, not out of shame, but out of strength. I swallowed, my throat tight, my eyes burning. I hadn't chosen strength. I'd chosen safety, smallness, a life where nobody could hurt me. But his words made it sound different, noble, and I didn't know how to carry that. He stepped closer, his voice lower, meant for me, but still audible to the room. We've been looking for you, Eleanor, because the nation owes you a debt, and tonight we begin to repay it. One of the officers stepped forward, a small box in his hands, its surface dark velvet. Hargrove took it, opening it with a reverence that made my chest ache. Inside was a medal, its ribbon red and gold, its surface catching the light. The Distinguished Intelligence Medal, he said, holding it up for the crowd to see, for extraordinary service to the United States of America. The room erupted, not in applause, not yet, but in a collective intake of breath, a sound like the world shifting. I stared at the metal, my vision blurring, my hands trembling. I didn't want it. I didn't want any of this. But Hargrove's eyes told me I didn't have a choice, not anymore. He stepped closer, his voice a whisper now, just for me. "You earned this, Sparrow. Let us give it to you." I nodded, barely, my throat too tight for words. He pinned the metal to my dress, his hands steady, careful, the weight of it foreign against my chest. The room was still, their eyes on me, their silence a question I couldn't answer. I thought of the desert, of the nights I'd spent alone, of the grid I'd built with my own hands. I thought of Daniel, his coffee, his smile, the way I'd walked away. I thought of Clara, of Jessica, of the town that had made me small, and I felt it, that quiet fire, the one that had made me Sparrow. It wasn't gone. It had never been gone. Hargrove stepped back, and the officers saluted, their movements crisp, synchronized. The crowd rose slow at first, then all at once their applause, a wave that crashed over me. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't cry. I stood, my hands clasped, my eyes on the horizon, only I could see. Clara was out there, her face pale, her hands still. Jessica was frozen, her smile gone. The mayor was clapping his tie, forgotten. And I was Eleanor Sparrow, both, and neither standing in the light I'd spent my life avoiding. The applause was a tide rising and falling, pulling at the edges of me. I stood on the stage, the metal heavy against my chest, its ribbon a quiet pressure I hadn't expected. The chandeliers above cast their light in soft fragments, and the room seemed to shimmer as if caught in a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real, the faces, the silence beneath the clapping, the weight of their eyes. Colonel Hargrove stood beside me, his presence a steady anchor, his hands clasped behind his back. The officers remained at attention, their salutes a gesture I hadn't seen in decades, not since the desert, not since Sparrow. I wanted to step back, to slip off the stage, to be invisible again. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not now. Hargrove raised a hand, and the applause tapered the room, settling into a hush that felt alive, expectant. He looked at me, his eyes carrying a question I wasn't ready to answer. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low but clear, meant for the room as much as for me, "would you like to say a few words?" It was gentle, an offer, not a command, but it landed like a stone in my chest. "Speak." I hadn't spoken about this, not to Clara, not to anyone, not even to myself, in the quiet of my own house. The words I'd buried were locked deep where they couldn't hurt me. But the crowd was waiting, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief, and I felt the pull of it, the need to give them something. I stepped closer to the podium, my hands brushing its edge, the wood cool under my fingers. My throat was tight, my heart a steady thud. I looked out at the room, at the sea of gowns and suits, at Clara's pale face near the front, at Jessica's wide eyes, at the mayor's crooked tie. They were strangers and neighbors, people who'd known me my whole life and never known me at all. I thought of the letter in my purse, its words a map of a life I'd hidden. I thought of the grid, the consoles, the nights I'd spent alone with secrets that could break the world. And I thought of Sparrow, her shadow stretching across the stage, her voice waiting to be heard. My voice cracked, soft, unsteady. I paused, my hands tightening on the podium, and tried again. "I don't have much to say." The room was silent, their eyes locked on me, their breath held. I felt Hargrove's presence steady, encouraging, but I didn't look at him. I looked at the crowd, at the truth they didn't know. "I did my job," I said, my voice stronger now, though still quiet. "That's all. I did what was asked of me, and I did it because it mattered. Not for this." I touched the metal, its weight foreign, unfamiliar. Not for recognition, but because it was right. The words felt inadequate, small against the vastness of what I'd carried. I wanted to tell them about the desert, the heat that clung to your skin, the hum of servers that became your heartbeat. I wanted to tell them about the nights I'd sat alone, decoding signals that could save lives or end them. I wanted to tell them about Daniel, his coffee, his questions, the way I'd walked away because I didn't know how to stay. But those weren't their stories. They were mine, and I wasn't ready to give them up. I stepped back, my hands falling to my sides, the metal catching the light. Hargrove nodded just once and turned to the crowd. "Eleanor Grace Whitmore, codename Sparrow," he said, his voice resonant, final. For your unparalleled contribution to the security of this nation, we honor you. Not just with this medal, but with our gratitude, our respect, and our promise to remember. The applause came again, louder now, a wave that crashed and didn't stop. I stood, my face calm, my heart racing, and let it wash over me. Clara was clapping her hands, slow, her eyes wide with something I couldn't name: shock, pride, maybe regret. Jessica was still, her date whispering in her ear, her smile gone. The mayor was on his feet, his hands enthusiastic, his confusion forgotten. I saw them all, and I saw none of them. I saw the desert instead, the stars above the console's glow, the weight of a world I'd carried alone. A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. I was 26 in a bunker deep underground, my hands shaking as I typed the final sequence that would activate the grid. The room was cold, the air thick with tension. My commanding officer, a man with eyes like Hargrove's, stood behind me, his voice low. "This is it, Sparrow. You're rewriting history." I didn't look at him. I didn't look at anyone. I typed, my fingers steady despite the fear, and the screens lit up, the network alive, humming a beast I'd created. When it was done, they didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They nodded their respect, a quiet thing, and sent me back to work. That was the moment I'd given everything: my youth, my sleep, my heart. That was the sacrifice they'd never see. I blinked and the bunker was gone. The ballroom was real again, the applause fading, the crowd settling. Hargrove gestured for me to step down, and I did, my flat soft against the stage, my dress brushing my knees. The officers saluted again, their movements crisp, and I nodded, a small acknowledgement I hadn't planned. The crowd was still standing, their faces a mix of reverence and disbelief. I felt their questions, their need to understand, but I didn't know them answers. Not tonight, maybe not ever. As I reached my table, the principal stood, his hand extended. "Ms. Whitmore." He said, his voice thick. I had no idea. I shook his hand, my grip firm, my smile polite but distant. The councilman's wife was crying. Her napkin crumpled, her words a soft jumble of apologies and awe. I nodded, said nothing, and picked up my purse. The letter inside, a quiet reminder of who I'd been. I wanted to leave, to slip out the side door, to be alone with my thoughts. But Clara was there suddenly, her hand on my arm, her eyes searching mine. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low, unsteady. "Why didn't you tell me it wasn't anger?" Not exactly, but it was close hurt maybe, or betrayal. Her red dress was too bright, her perfume too strong, and I felt the years between us, the distance I'd built to keep myself safe. There was nothing to tell. I said, my voice soft, final. It wasn't true, but it was the only answer I had. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her hand falling away. I saw the questions in her eyes, the ones she'd ask later, the ones I wouldn't answer. I turned away, my purse heavy, my heart heavier. Jessica was next, her green dress catching the light as she approached, her date trailing behind. "Eleanor, that was incredible," she said, her voice too bright, her smile too wide. "I mean, Sparrow, you're like a spy or something." She laughed, a nervous sound, and I saw the calculation in her eyes, the need to make this fit her story of me. I didn't smile back. "Just Eleanor." I said, my tone even, my eyes steady. She faltered, her laugh dying, and nodded, stepping back. I felt her confusion, her need to understand, but I didn't know her that either. I moved toward the door, the crowd parting their whispers, a soft hum. Hargrove was there, his hand on my elbow, guiding me through the sea of faces. "You did well?" he said, his voice low, meant only for me. I nodded, my throat tight, my eyes on the exit. The metal was heavy, the applause still ringing in my ears, but I felt something else too, a quiet fire, the one that had made me Sparrow. It was awake now, and I didn't know how to put it back to sleep. The ballroom's air felt thinner now, as if the weight of the moment had pressed it out of the room. The applause had faded, but the echoes lingered, a hum in my ears, as I stood near the exit, Colonel Hargrove at my side. My purse was clutched tight. The letter inside it, a silent witness to the life I'd just laid bare. The metal on my dress caught the chandelier light, its ribbon, a quiet reminder of what I'd done, who I'd been. Sparrow. The name felt foreign and familiar, a shadow I'd carried for decades now standing in the open. I wanted to leave to slip into the night to be alone with the truth. But the crowd wasn't done with me. Not yet. Hargrove's hand was light on my elbow, guiding but not pushing his presence a steady line I could lean into. "You're not alone in this, Eleanor." He said, his voice low, meant only for me. Not anymore. I nodded, barely, my throat tight. I didn't trust myself to speak, not when my heart was so loud, not when the room was still watching their eyes, a mix of awe and something sharper, curiosity maybe, or envy. I felt Clara's gaze from across the room, her red dress a beacon, her face unreadable. Jessica was nearby, her green gown shimmering as she whispered to her date, her glances darting my way. The mayor was shaking hands, his tie still crooked, his smile too wide, as if he could claim this moment for himself. I saw them all, and I saw none of them. I saw the desert instead, the stars, the console's glow, the weight of a world I'd carried alone. The quartet began to play again, their notes soft, tentative, filling the silence that had settled over the room. People were standing now, moving toward the stage, toward me, their voices a low murmur. I braced myself, my hands tightening on my purse, my face a mask I'd perfected years ago. The principal from my table was first, his hand extended again, his eyes bright with something like pride. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice thick. "I don't know what to say. Thank you. For everything." I shook his hand, my grip firm, my smile small. "Just Eleanor," I said, my voice soft but steady. He nodded, stepping back, his wife dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Others followed, a veteran in a wheelchair, his medals pinned to his jacket, his nod sharp, respectful. A woman I recognized from church, her hands clasped her words, a soft jumble of apologies and awe. A young man, barely 20, who said he wanted to serve because of people like me. I nodded, murmured thanks, kept my eyes steady. But inside, I was trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of their gratitude, their recognition. It was too much, too bright, after years of being the moon unseen, until the world went dark. Clara was next, her approach, slower, her heels clicking on the polished floor. The crowd parted for her, their whispers trailing in her wake. She stopped in front of me, her hands empty, her plaque from earlier forgotten somewhere. Her eyes were wide, searching, and for the first time in years, I saw her, not the son, not the sister who outshone me, but a woman who didn't know how to reach me. "Eleanor," she said, her voice low, cracked. I didn't know. Her hands fluttered, then fell, as if she wanted to touch me but didn't know how. I looked at her. Really looked, and saw the lines around her eyes, the weight of her own life, the distance I'd built between us. "You weren't supposed to." I said, my voice quiet, final. It wasn't cruel, but it was true. I'd chosen silence not just for me, but for her, for the life she'd built, bright and open, where secrets like mine didn't belong. She flinched just slightly, and I saw the hurt, the question she'd carry for years. "Why didn't you trust me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. Trust wasn't the issue. It was love. I'd kept her out to keep her safe, to let her be the sun while I stayed the moon. I touched her arm just for a moment, my fingers light, and then let go. She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and stepped back, her red dress folding into the crowd. Jessica was there before I could catch my breath, her smile too bright, her voice too loud. "Eleanor, this is unreal," she said, her hands gesturing, her date hovering behind her. "I mean, Sparrow, you're like a legend or something." Her laugh was nervous, her eyes sharp, calculating, as if she could rewrite me into a story that fit her world. I didn't smile back. "Just Eleanor," I said again. My tone even, my gaze steady. She faltered, her laugh dying, and nodded, her confidence slipping. "Right," she said, softer now. "Just Eleanor." She stepped away, her date pulling her toward the bar, her glances still darting my way. Hargrove was watching, his expression unreadable, but I saw the approval in his eyes, the way he nodded when I handled each approach with the same quiet dignity. He leaned in, his voice low. "They're trying to understand," he said. "Give them time." I nodded, but I didn't need their understanding. I'd never needed it. What I needed was the strength to stand here, to be seen, to carry Sparrow without breaking. The mayor took the stage again, his voice booming, calling for a toast. Glasses were raised, the clink of crystal filling the room, and I stood, my hands empty, my purse at my feet. To Eleanor Whitmore, he said, his tie still askew, his smile genuine for once. To Sparrow and to all who serve in silence, the crowd echoed him, their voices a wave, and I nodded, my face calm, my heart a storm. Hargrove raised an imaginary glass, his eyes on mine, and I saw it again. Respect, gratitude, a promise I didn't fully understand. The officers approached, their salutes crisp, their faces solemn. One, the younger, stepped forward, his voice low. "Ma'am," he said, "it's an honor." He extended his hand and I shook it, my grip steady, now my fear gone. The other followed his salute, lingering, and I knotted, my throat tight. They stepped back and Hargrove took their place. His hand extended, not for a shake, but for something more. I took it, his grip, firm, warm, and for a moment I felt it, the weight of my service, not as a burden, but as a bridge connecting me to them, to this moment, to myself. The crowd was dispersing now, the quartet playing something soft, mournful. I picked up my purse, the letter inside, a quiet companion, and moved toward the door, Hargrove at my side. The metal was heavy, but I carried it just as I'd carried everything else. Outside, the night air was cool, sharp, the stars above a mirror of the desert sky I'd known so long ago. Hargrove stopped, his hands in his pockets, his eyes on the horizon. "You'll hear from us," he said, his voice quiet. "But for now, go home, Eleanor. Rest." I nodded, my purse heavy, my heart steady. "Thank you," I said, the words small but true. He smiled just slightly and turned back to the ballroom, his shadow long against the marble steps. I walked to Clara's car, where she was waiting, her face still pale, her hands gripping the wheel. We didn't speak. Not then, not yet. The drive was silent, the radio off, the night a blanket around us. I looked out the window, the stars above the metal against my chest, and felt Sparrow settle, not gone, but quiet, at peace. The morning after the gala, my house felt smaller, as if the walls had drawn closer in the night. The air smelled of lavender and old wood, the same as always, but there was a new stillness, a weight that hadn't been there before. I stood in the kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea, the steam curling upward like a prayer. The metal sat on the table, its ribbon folded neatly, its surface catching the light from the window. I hadn't touched it since Clara dropped me off, her silence heavy in the car, her eyes avoiding mine. My purse was there too, the letter still inside, unopened but ever present. I didn't need to read it. Its words were part of me, woven into my bones. I moved through the day slowly, deliberately, as if testing the ground beneath me. The town was quiet, the street outside empty, but I felt the whispers, the eyes that would follow me now. They'd seen me on that stage, heard my name, my code name, the truth I'd kept buried. Sparrow. The word was a pulse, soft but steady, and I didn't know how to carry it in this life, this small house, this town that had made me invisible. I watered the plants, dusted the shelves, folded a blanket that didn't need folding. But my hands were restless, my thoughts drifting to the desert, to the consoles, to the woman I'd been. I wasn't her anymore, not fully, but she wasn't gone either. She'd been waiting all these years for me to claim her. Clara called at noon, her voice hesitant, unlike her usual sharpness. "Eleanor," she said, "can I come over? We need to talk." I paused, my hand on the phone, the clock ticking behind me. I wanted to say no, to keep her out, to hold this moment for myself. But she was my sister, the sun to my moon, and I couldn't shut her out forever. "All right," I said, my voice soft. "Come by this afternoon." She arrived at 3, her knock tentative, her red scarf a bright slash against the gray of her coat. I let her in, the door creaking, and we stood in the living room, awkward like strangers. She looked around, her eyes lingering on the metal, on the purse, on the life she'd never understood. "Eleanor," she began, then stopped, her hands twisting together. "I don't know where to start. I'm sorry for everything." Her voice cracked, and I saw it then. The guilt, the regret, the years of assuming she knew me when she didn't. I gestured to the couch, and we sat, the space between us wide but not empty. "You don't need to be sorry." I said, my voice steady, though my heart wasn't. I chose this. I chose to keep it from you. She shook her head, her eyes bright with tears. But why, I'm your sister. I could have helped. I could have been there. I looked at her. Really looked and saw the woman who'd always shown, who'd never had to hide. You were there, I said, my voice softer now. In your way. But this was mine to carry. We talked for hours, the words slow at first, then easier like a stream finding its path. I didn't tell her everything. Not the missions, not the grid, not Daniel, but I told her enough. I told her about the desert, the loneliness, the pride, I'd felt the fear. She listened, her hands still, her eyes wide, and for the first time I felt seen not as Sparrow, but as Eleanor, her sister, her equal. When she left, her hug was tight, her scarf brushing my cheek, and I felt the distance between us shrink just a little. The days that followed were quiet but different. The town didn't forget, not entirely. Jessica stopped by, her smile less sharp, her words careful. I misjudged you, Eleanor, she said, standing on my porch, her hands empty of petitions or pretense. I'm sorry. I nodded, my face calm, my heart forgiving. It's all right, I said, and meant it. Others came too, the librarian, the diner waitress, the veteran from the gala. They didn't ask for details, didn't pry, but their nods, their smiles, their small kindnesses were enough. I wasn't invisible anymore, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that. I went back to my routines, library visits, grocery runs, Sunday dinners alone, but they felt lighter, as if the weight I'd carried had shifted, not gone but shared. The folder from Hargrove stayed on my shelf unopened, but I didn't hide it anymore. It was part of me, like the letter, like the metal, like Sparrow. I didn't hear from Hargrove again, not yet, but I knew I would. He'd said I'd hear from them, and I believed him. When the time came, I'd decide whether to step back into that world or to stay here in the life I'd built. For now, I was content to wait. One evening, I took the medal from the table and carried it to my bedroom. I opened the drawer of my nightstand where I kept my mother's Bible, a few old photos, a hairpin Daniel had given me under the desert stars. I set the medal inside its ribbon, folded its weight, settling among the things that mattered. I didn't need to display it, didn't need the world to see. It was enough that I knew that I carried it, that I was both Eleanor and Sparrow, whole in a way I hadn't been before. I walked to the porch, the night air cool, the stars bright above. I thought of the gala, of Clara's tears, of Jessica's apology, of Hargrove's steady hand. I thought of the desert, of the grid, of the girl who'd built it with her own hands. I thought of you listening to this, wondering who I am, what I've learned. And I want to tell you this, you don't owe anyone your past. It lives in your spine, in the way you walk, in the quiet moments when you're alone with the truth. You don't need to shout it. Don't need to prove it. It's yours, and that's enough. I folded the letter, the one I'd carried for years, and tucked it into my pocket, its edges soft against my fingers. I didn't need to read it anymore. I knew its words, knew its weight, knew the woman who'd earned it. I stepped off the porch, my flats quiet on the grass, and walked into the night, my head high, my heart steady. The stars were bright, the town was sleeping, and I was Eleanor Grace Whitmore Sparrow both, and neither moving forward with the dignity I'd always had, now seen, now mine.